Thanks so much for joining us, y'all. I am excited about the latest in our weekly live streams, and I'm grateful to a couple of people who are going to be joining us over the next hour. I want to particularly shout out the rest of the production team, so stick with us till the end. Over the next hour, we'll talk about some local events that have just happened and some more that are coming up soon. I'm really excited about a chance to interview John Avalos, who's a former member of our Board of Supervisors. You'll hear, and hopefully soon to be again, you'll hear from him in a little bit. We'll talk about some upcoming events, and then I'm really excited for a live performance at the end of our live stream today from Lia Rose in the East Bay. So let's get into it. So I'll just walk through a few things that have happened in the last week or so since we were last together. The one that I'm really excited about, I'm always enthused when I see Speaker Pelosi use her very powerful office to advance our campaign platform, particularly when it requires her to abandon previously held positions that we were disappointed by. And the latest place where she has thankfully taken our lead is with respect to heeding the widespread calls to save the post office. We've had a number of social media posts, and I've had a chance to speak in a few different forums about the importance of the post office and the way it relates to any number of important public goals. The post office is, for instance, it's a great example of socialism in practice. And it's one way that shows up is that it basically subsidizes rural communities. It subsidizes small businesses. It subsidizes big businesses. The post office is a crucial part of our public infrastructure. And it becomes even more compelling when we think of it in the context not just of being a publicly owned enterprise and also an employer of vast numbers of Americans across all different income strata, but also it's in the context of a pandemic. In an election year, the post office emerges as a national security asset, a crucial one, without which we, frankly, might not be able to ensure the continuity of the republic. So that makes saving the post office a national security imperative. I haven't heard Speaker Pelosi describe it in those terms, but I don't care, frankly, as long as she's willing to show up, which she was not before. I am happy to see that and grateful for it. So I do want to give credit where it's due. And just as with congressional war powers and the impeachment of the president, and the PRO Act, the Protecting Right to Organize Act, I'm grateful to Speaker Pelosi for heeding calls from the community for her more sincere representation. So thank you for taking our lead on those issues. And of course, I aim to offer San Francisco a voice that will not take years of prodding to get there. And having helped compel the speaker to adopt our city's views finally in each of those arenas, I'm happy to give us a voice in Congress that will do it across the range of other issues as well. Another piece that I'm really excited about, and this is something we've frankly seen a lot of leadership in Congress on, is the calls for a mortgage freeze and forgiveness. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as well, but I just want to give a quick shout out to Representative Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, member of the squad. She's probably the member of Congress who I most closely aspire to emulate. I'm so inspired by her example and her relief bill, which would effectively freeze and forgive mortgage and rent payments until 1 month after the state of emergency related to the pandemic is lifted. That's an incredibly important reform. And I want to come back to that later on in the live stream when we're talking about the May Day actions later this week. Just earlier today, if I'm not mistaken, Representative Ro Khanna from San Jose and Senator Elizabeth Warren, hosted an event promoting their Workers' Bill of Rights. They have a new proposed Bill of Rights for essential workers, and I want to just run through it for people because it's really important. It includes 10 different discrete measures, which together would frankly transform labor relations in this country, particularly for people who are participating in the so-called gig economy. And so the first, and this is baseline, all workers deserve health and safety protections. And we'll have a chance to talk, I think, with John about that principle in just a little bit. All workers deserve robust premium compensation, hazard pay, for being placed at risk to help support the economy and deliver essential services and goods to the rest of us. Protections for collective bargaining agreements, that is super critical. That's the difference between workers being preyed upon by corporate platforms, as many participants in the gig economy are, versus having opportunities, as unionized workforces do, to collectively bargain for fair wages and benefits. universal paid sick leave and family and medical leave become especially important during a time of pandemic because they're the only way to ensure public health, protections for whistleblowers, an end to worker misclassification, ensuring that workers are classified as employees and receive the benefits to which they're entitled instead of as independent contractors, effectively, companies gaming the system to evade doing right by their workers. The Essential Workers Bill of Rights also includes request or demand, I should say, for healthcare security, proposal for support for childcare. We want to treat workers as experts and hold corporations accountable for protecting workers. So all very important things in the Essential Workers Bill of Rights. I'm very excited to support it. I hope that Speaker Pelosi would see fit to support it. She hasn't seen fit to support any of these principles in the past. Again, I hope to see her better show up for the needs of our community and Americans struggling in the face of the pandemic. All right, a few quick campaign updates, and then we'll get into the interview with John. So last Thursday, I was very honored to have a chance to join a number of student groups around the country that hosted me for a forum on what the future of socialism looks like going forward. It was convened by Harvard for Bernie with a number of co-sponsoring organizations. I apologize for any background noise. It seems that my neighbors have decided that now is the time exactly of all to start roof work. But in any case, aside from Harvard for Bernie, the co-sponsoring groups included Howard University for Bernie, Yale for Bernie, Texas State University for Bernie, the Spartan Solidarity Network in Michigan, Colorado State University for Bernie, UConn for Bernie, University of Chicago for Bernie, Vanderbilt YDSA, that's Young Democratic Socialists of America, and that video is available online. It was a fascinating conversation to pull together a number of other candidates challenging entrenched incumbents around the country, including Hassan Lecky in Massachusetts, Sammy Lisa Lopez in New York, and Joshua Collins in Washington State. The next day, on Friday, I had a chance to speak with the Youth Climate Strike. The video from that is not yet publicly available, but it will be soon. We talked about a bunch of different dimensions of climate justice. I was really excited just to hear from so many inspired youth activists. They had great questions, and it was a really illuminating conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground. The next day, I had a chance. This is less wearing my congressional candidate hat and more stepping into the self I've been for a long time here in San Francisco, but a group of poets and organizers who I've known for the better part of 2 decades hosted an annual event in City Hall called Poems Under the Dome. There's a pandemic this year, so we did it virtually online, and that was an incredible gathering. I read a poem about my late mother and dedicated it to all the people that we're losing in the face of the pandemic. On a less somber note, with the campaign, we had a really incredible week with the launch of our distributed phone banking program. So we had 3 different training calls with new volunteers on Tuesday, on Thursday, and on Saturday. And the program's expanding. We'll share more updates about that in a little bit, about the training calls and how to plug in. But I do want to share a few shout outs to some all-stars among the team. So we've had over 100 volunteers already, and we invite people to plug into those training calls again on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. If you want to plug in or sign up, visit us at shahid.fyi/volunteer. And some of the all-star folks, so a bunch of people here in the Bay Area who have been making calls to other volunteers to encourage them and engage them in phone banking include Raya, Nicholas, Maxine, Harlow, Kylie, and Jake. Thank you so much for all of your time, talent, dedication. And then folks in the all-stars in the phone banking team who've been reaching out to San Francisco voters on our behalf include, these are people all across the country: Elliot in Maryland, Christine in Texas, Anurag here in the Bay Area, Ben in Vermont, Michael in New York. Thank you for all your time. This is how we're going to win a race. And I so appreciate the thousands of phone calls that people are making on our behalf. And it's going to be a big part of our path to victory. So I'm excited to introduce our special guest this week. John Avalos is a candidate to rejoin the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, representing District 11. He is a lot of things. He was the former chair of our Budget and Finance Committee, which gives John a particular set of keys to the proverbial castle. His district includes a number of neighborhoods: Crocker Amazon, the Excelsior, Ingleside, Ocean View, and the Outer Mission. And his first term on the Board of Supervisors many years ago started in 2008. and he left office in 2017, and we're very excited to help him get back into City Hall. Welcome to our live stream, John. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. Thank you for having me. Excited to share the happenings in District 11 under the COVID-19 spell we're all under right now.
Yes. And we'll get to that in just a minute. One thing I want to really highlight for people is just your long history of public service. And one of the particular legacies that I think about when I think about your term, the last time that we had a chance to be represented by you on the board, was your work around securing the sanctuary city commitment back in 2011. Could you share a little bit with people just about that history, what that looked like? You know, I think of that as a profound act of leadership that you've given to the city, and to the extent you see that commitment at all under threat today, you know, whether by Trump or other actors, we'd love to learn a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. It's actually one of the things I think is most significant about my time on the board. It was actually, work that I had been doing for many, many years, going back to my work in labor, that I was involved in immigrant rights work, actually going back to, 1994 when Proposition 184 was being put forward, or to deny immigrants living in California any type of access to healthcare and education benefits. That measure, I think it was Prop 187, had actually passed, but it was actually thrown out by the courts as being unconstitutional to deny people basic rights based on their status. So that was my earliest involvement with immigrant rights. And then in 2006, when Sensenbrenner, Congressmember Sensenbrenner, was putting forward some really awful legislation, very similar to what was being done, had been tried in California with Prop 187. They tried to deny all these rights and ability for people living as immigrants in the United States to have any access to the same type of services and care. There was just movements all over the country to protest this legislation and to work against it. In San Francisco, we had demonstrations that were involving like 30,000 people on the streets, some of the biggest immigrant rights demonstrations that we had ever had. And we realized that there was a lot of fear that was sown into the community, and members in the community who were immigrants and their allies, we needed to have information about what was happening. There was so much hysteria that was whipped up, and people didn't know what was up or down, right from wrong, in terms of policies affecting immigrants. So in San Francisco that year, we put $1 million in the budget to create the San Francisco Immigration Legal and Education Network that would provide legal assistance for folks who were, seeking support as they were being rounded up in the immigration system, or be able to just avail themselves of services that can help get themselves on a pathway towards citizenship. And so that was established. That was part of my record in making sure the immigrants had resources here in San Francisco. Then it was 2013 that we actually worked to update the sanctuary policy, and we did it again in 2016 as well. In 2013, we had many, many years of the quote unquote secure communities program that was basically using local courts and law enforcement to receive information about who in the system was undocumented, who wasn't, and then basically the federal government, ICE, was requiring the courts and the sheriff's departments around the country to provide them the release dates of people who were leaving the system, so that ICE could be there to pick them up or take them over. And so basically we built a coalition of grassroots activists, a lot of organizations representing the immigrant community, a lot of lawyers, members of the SF Island Community Network, Garessen, groups under the coalition called Free SF, had worked with my office to develop a new policy that would basically bar the city and county from turning over any information to ICE about people's release dates from from the jail system or from the court system. And essentially, we wanted to do this because when people who are immigrants talk to law enforcement and believe that their involvement with law enforcement, whether it's as victims of crime or witnesses of crime or actual perpetrators of crime, their cooperation with law enforcement actually is greatly inhibited when they think that they're discussing anything with law enforcement is going to lead to their potential deportation. And so we wanted to make sure that as we're trying to make public safety work for everyone, that those who are actually living in San Francisco can be assured that they can actually seek remediation through the justice system in restoration of any harm caused in the justice system without any fear of being deported. And that was the premise behind the legislation. And we actually were able to get that legislation passed unanimously in, I believe it was September of 2013. And it was probably the strongest legislation in the country that would separate local law enforcement from the immigration dragnet that was stepped up under the Obama-Biden administration. So that was, the original part of it in 2013, but we actually had that updated again in 2016 as well. But I'll stop right there.
No, I do want you to go on. I was just saying thank you for doing that work. It's such a profound contribution to the community. And as an immigrant, I feel, while not a direct beneficiary, I feel, just very grateful for your leadership there. And then, you mentioned the unfortunate bipartisan nature of the assault on immigrant rights over the last decade. Is there anything you want to say about the state of immigrant rights today? Trump, for instance, recently declared a ban on immigration entirely. And until the pandemic hit, ICE was declaring a crackdown on sanctuary cities, including specifically SF. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it appears that Donald Trump is just basically a one-trick pony. Is trying to assert this America First and narrowing down what America First means. Pretty much it means like a white America and not America that really understands and accepts and embraces the incredible commitment that we have to people who've come from all over the world to be here, whether they're forced migration that happened with Africans and African Americans who've come here, or other people from all over the world. And we need to balance that, of course, with indigenous people who actually have go back tens of thousands of years to being here in the Americas. But yeah, that's the world we live in. And anytime there's like any kind of incident that stokes up people's feelings about immigrants, that's actually exploited by Donald Trump and even like the Democrats when it comes to how we make sure that we're protecting everyone who lives within our borders. In 2015, there was in San Francisco, we had the incident where there was an accidental shooting of Kate Steinle by an immigrant. This happened maybe about a couple of weeks after Donald Trump had first announced that he was going to run for president. And of course, we all know his announcement was singling out immigrants from mostly his idea of Mexico, although it's probably from all over the world or Latin America, as rapists and criminals.
It might be the one area where his equal opportunity is his hate towards so many people who are differently situated. But I digress. Yeah. Yeah,
it could very well be. So basically, he used the image of Kate Steinle as what was at stake by allowing immigrants to remain in our country, and here in San Francisco, both Democrats and Republicans alike were saying that our sanctuary policy was too strong. Dianne Feinstein, who was senator, is still continues to be senator. She may have been running for Senate around that time. Had basically said, "I'm going to go into the jails and see how our justice system is working, and I want to make sure our jails are able to work with ICE." So she went down to Los Angeles County to do that work. And then here locally, we had an update to our sanctuary policy back in 1994 that basically said if you were merely booked on a felony, that you could be turned over to ICE. It was never enacted, and people forgot about it over the years. But after the Kate Steinle incident happened, the politics that were driving, our local politics here in San Francisco, and the sheriff, McCreamy at the time, was not in the good graces of Ed Lee, who had tried to oust him years before, had basically said that, look at the old piece of legislation that was never enacted and said, that was never enforced, and said, Ross McCreamy should have picked up the phone and called ICE because this person was booked on a felony in the past. And Ross McCreamy didn't do that. And so the new sheriff coming in, that was an election year, the new sheriff who came in, basically, she ran a policy that I'm going to be turning over people to ICE. I'm going to be making sure that we're not putting a blockage on the ability to make our streets safer by turning, immigrant criminals over to the ICE, program. And that was a complete, turnaround from what, we had originally, why we put our immigrant rights legislation forward in the first place. And so we had to fight back, not just on to restore our sanctuary policy, to exclude this language that would allow law enforcement to turn people over to ICE just for being booked on a felony. We had to actually convince the sheriff that her approach was going to be wrong. And so we had to go back and revise the whole sanctuary policy in the past, from scratch. And that's what we did in 2016. When we did that in 2016, involving all the same groups that we had done before, this time we had Breitbart News in the board chamber. And Breitbart News was there training their cameras on immigrants, trying to show that immigrants were causing, great fear and harm, even within the board chamber of the room, and trying to show these lurid scenes of just regular people, in the board chamber. I think the presence of Breitbart and the attention that was given helped to convince the sheriff to actually lessen up her attitude about, she didn't want to be associated with the right-wing elements in this country. Right. And so we were able to eventually, convince her to drop her mode of, trying to enforce the federal law at the local level and allow local law to prevail to make sure that we can actually protect our immigrants moving forward. In the process, after 2015, after this Kate Steinle, accidental killing, Fox News was in San Francisco, trying to whip up a lot of hatred for San Francisco for having a sanctuary policy. There were people knocking on all the supervisors' doors who had voted in favor of this legislation, which means all of us at the time. I had just moved, and so they went to my old house. And a week after Fox News went to my house. Okay. The cars in front of the old house I lived in were torched. So there was a lot at stake for people to take a stand on immigrant rights, and a lot of the hate that had been whipped up was actually making it very difficult for people to feel they can make decisions, or elected officials to feel that we can make decisions without retaliation being made against us. That's pretty much the saga of the immigrant rights sanctuary city update that we've had. When it comes to fight against the Trump administrations and the stepped up attacks on immigrants, the sanctuary policy that was written in 2016 was actually defended in the Supreme Court of the United States by the city attorney. So the language that we had put together with immigrant rights activists and the immigrant community that was embedded in that legislation was actually spoken forth and defended at the Supreme Court of the United States.
That's just so incredible work. I mean, all of it, the vision, the execution, the persistence of it over time, the relevance of it over time, which has grown only more poignant since. The story you shared, I knew some top lines of that, but the story you shared about the cars outside your old house, I had never heard that before. I'm so just grateful to you for, taking that risk on yourself. And it's, again, a really profound act of leadership. And if only to have a voice back on the board that has done that important and hard work of standing with immigrant communities at a time when it's still, we are all vulnerable. It's just thank you for doing that. If that was an example of your visionary work in the past, I want to turn the lens forward to your agenda in terms of returning to the board now in your candidacy. And I know that you've been an outspoken advocate and a really critical one as the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee of Public Banking. Do you want to share with our audience a little bit about why public banking can be so crucial to support everything from climate justice to worker rights?
Yeah, great. I've been working on public banking since about 2011. the year I ran for mayor in San Francisco. That was one of my signature pieces, was making sure that we could actually have control of our own tax dollars and our own expenditures. Right now, back then and still to this day, the city and county of San Francisco does its banking, its cash management with major banks like Bank of America. At that time, it was Wells Fargo. We might be using US Bank now. And so basically, we give away all of our money to these banks to manage, and we actually have to pay a fee for that. And there's no reason why we can't be in control of our own banking ourselves. If the money is ours, why give it away to another financial institution? And also the immediacy of that, the importance of that is that we know that the banks, despite being bailed out with our public dollars, they still think for their shareholders and not the public at large. So we'll see that there's so many problems that they have and scandals that they've shown us about how they mismanage our dollars, how they go after our property. They prevent us from. They actually make, like Wells Fargo was making false accounts for people without their permission. But at that time in 2011, San Francisco had experienced the subprime loan crisis and the Great Recession that was caused by the banks failing. A lot of it was based on speculation on mortgages. And in this city, in San Francisco, there was this complete turning a blind eye by the political establishment and City Hall to the thousands of people in the southern part of San Francisco in the Excelsior District 11, Visitation Valley, Bayview, Hunters Point, Lakeview neighborhoods. So looking at District 10 and District 11, all these households, mostly working class, people of color who had worked for years to be able to own their own property with mortgages, and to see a lot of them actually go into default and eventual foreclosure. And so the public bank idea came out of the process, out of the idea like we can't, leave the fate of working people living in the southern part of San Francisco and District 11, District 10 to the private banks. Our city has a responsibility to actually make sure that we can have more secure mortgages, that we can actually use our city dollars to actually do principal reduction, to re-modify loans, to make sure that we can actually have interest rates that are actually going to work for working people, that are actually going to make owning a home recession-proof. Those are the ideas behind wanting to create a public bank. And we also saw, around that time in 2008, all these banks received 800 billion, maybe almost
Right.
close to $1 trillion in bailout money.
Right.
That bailout money went to Wall Street banks and didn't go to Main Street. And so really we wanted to see how we can actually take back, using our local city funds to really shore up Main Street, small businesses, local property owners, local working class folks, so that our fate and our financial fate can be in our own hands, used for our own purposes for community development.
So powerful. I mean, between seeing the aspects of your vision that have been able to take root in policy, like with the sanctuary commitments, and then the parts of your vision that have yet to be secured in policy, and maybe to set the historical stage for people. I think a lot of our listeners might come to politics perhaps in the last few years, maybe the last 4, and I think there's been a really dramatic mobilization among people on the left since the emergence of our criminal president, Trump, right? But in 2008, 2011, this vision that you're articulating of refashioning the banking system and creating alternatives that put public externalities before private profit and privilege keeping people in their homes over the sort of corporate predation that it characterizes private banking. It's just such an incredible act of prescience. And I do hope very much to see that aspect of your vision also take root. Again, sorry for the background noise. I'm not exactly sure what's going on.
Well, these ideas have been kind of swirling around for a while. I believe Matt Gonzalez talked about the public bank when he was running for mayor. He didn't remain in office, after he, didn't win. And so that kind of was just sitting on the outside, just not being worked on. And so I picked it up. And at that time in 2011, there was the Occupy movement that had started. And Here in San Francisco, it was much greater than people occupying public space or just looking at the Federal Reserve Bank on Market Street or Justin Herbert Plaza after they were ousted from the Federal Reserve Bank on Market Street.
Right.
People were occupying homes here. There was a whole street on in District 10, Quesada Street, where there were maybe about 5 or 6 homes that were all, in default and going through foreclosure. And we were there, occupying homes to make sure that the banks weren't going to take them over. And we've been around in District 11 and District 10 to stop the sheriff from evicting people from their homes because they're still within the process of trying to modify their loans, and they're not getting support from the federal government. They're not getting support from the local banks to be able to actually, have a process where they can retain their property. So yeah, this has been an ongoing issue, but real, things happening on the ground that show us that we need to make our government resources much greater to support working people and not just the Wall Street banks and the 1%.
Right on. But and when we think about other ways that those disparities between the 99%, those of us who, are working people and the 1%, the wealthy people who survive on and profit very and live lavishly off the labor of others. I see one of the events that's unfolding under our feet that's really sharpening those distinctions and deepening that divide is obviously a pandemic. And, we're seeing this bifurcation between, on the one hand, folks who have the privilege to work from home and be compensated without putting themselves at risk. And so many Americans for whom putting food on the table means accepting health risk. Can you talk a little bit about how the pandemic's impacting your constituents in D11 and thinking particularly about, your work as a labor union organizer in the National Union of Healthcare Workers? Do you want to talk anything, either, maybe both, your constituents in D11 and the healthcare workers that we're all relying on to keep us safe in this time of pandemic?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I think, everyone's world is turned upside down right now. Whether you're able to work and shelter in place, your home is not the most ideal place to, be able to, do your work. And it's also now, if you have kids who are in school, they're at home and they have homework and they have work they're doing. And so you're actually really, struggling to like how you can accomplish all the things you need to accomplish in your home. In this part of San Francisco, we're mostly working class, middle class folks. There are not a lot of independently wealthy people, so everyone here is working to get by, and a lot of working in the service industry, and a lot are essential workers. So people who are in the grocery stores, people who are making sure our supply lines are open. And so you have a lot of people who are actually working here who are exposed to community spread and are also working really hard to stop community spread and are doing their part not in their homes, but in their workplaces. So you have this combination of people who are working and putting themselves at risk, and then they come home to their families, and perhaps they're putting their families at risk. It's always hard to like stop, the transmission or to be free of the worry about transmission. So it's an anxiety that we all have. And then we have a lot of workers who work in the hospitality industry in this part of town. A lot of hotel union workers, a lot of people work in restaurants, a lot of immigrants who work in the kitchens, a lot of servers, they're all out of work. And so that's a huge issue. You go to our parks, and earlier in the part of the pandemic, before when the parks were kind of open, you saw a lot of our restaurant workers out there playing soccer or being out with friends, hanging out, because they didn't really have a lot of space in their homes to hang out in. And that's now that's closed down. But so many people have been, lost their jobs. Here in this part of San Francisco, we're over 50% foreign born. Not everyone's undocumented. A lot of people, probably the majority have green cards, but we probably have a lot of people who are undocumented. And so right now, if you're undocumented, you can't access unemployment. You can't access any of the relief funds. to his credit, Gavin Newsom has set up a relief fund for immigrants, undocumented immigrants in California, and I think that's exactly the right thing to do. But you can't do it from the federal government. So we have a lot of folks who are just living with great anxiety about inability to find even stimulus checks to be able to keep going. And our efforts to actually prevent people from being evicted for not being able to pay rent are great, that they're happening, but they're not as comprehensive as they need to be. They don't have the backing of the state government. So we know there's still a lot of work to do to actually bring some sense of economic security to a lot of people. In this part of San Francisco, in District 11, we have a lot of households that have in-laws. That the only way you can actually afford to, be able to keep up with your mortgage is that you have a room that you rent out. Often it's to a family member, or it's to a relative or a friend of the family. Very informal relationships that landlords have with tenants. But now you have tenants who don't have the ability to pay their mortgages or their rents. And that means the landlord doesn't have the ability to pay the mortgage. So you have landlords, property owners who are just working class folks who are struggling now because of the economic downturn that affects some of the people that live in their own homes. So overall, we're seeing a great insecurity here in District 11. I think it's probably a greater part of District 11 is experiencing the downturn that we're all, in sheltering places causing. Other places in San Francisco probably have a greater, sense of wealth. Like look at District 6, you probably have a lot of people who are billionaires living in District 6. Mm-hmm. You also have probably the poorest people in the world who don't even have a place to live, right. And live on our streets. But you have it. But District 11 is much more homogenous in who lives here economically, and you probably have a greater portion of people in District 11 that are experiencing a lot more anxiety about accessing the basics to keep up rent, keep food on the table, keep their kids going through the education system, trying to work from home while all the stresses that you're going under with your family are around you. This is the reality of a lot of working people, middle class people here in District 11. At the same time, this is a really vibrant part of San Francisco. We don't get a lot of attention from the rest of the city. You don't see stories about District 11 in the Chronicle, but you have so many people who are very active and doing a lot of mutual aid work in this part of town. We're doing a lot of work around making sure that we get our fair share from resources from the rest of the city, even though we still don't. It's the work and activism of a lot of people in District 11 that keep our commercial corridors functioning at a better level, that keep our parks working, make sure that we have the kind of public safety needs from police and fire and community policing that we're supposed to have. All of these things are based on a lot of activism from District 11 residents who know that it's our voice that works collectively that makes City Hall, pay attention to us rather than the 1% that really dominate this city.
And thank you so much for giving voice to that community need for representation. It hasn't been, at least the seat on the board representing D11 has been wielded very differently by the person who's occupied it since you came in. Let's talk about your 2020 race. Tell us about both what prompted you to get in this time around, and then also how people can plug in to support your campaign.
Great, thank you. Well, let's see. When I was in office, the key to power, the key to change at City Hall, especially from a neighborhood like District 11, is really based on the collective voice of people here in District 11 challenging the status quo at City Hall. We helped to, at the time when we had the Great Recession, a lot of resources were being pulled out of the neighborhood. And so we realized that to challenge that, we need to build up our community leaders and assets. In District 11, typically, there's been a group of maybe 15 folks who have an active voice in City Hall. They represent a lot of neighborhood associations who do good work in the city, but they actually have not, been welcoming to a lot of other people who aren't part of their neighborhood association groups to be able to have a voice at City Hall. And what the neighborhood association groups, focusing on the basic ideas of quality of life issues, often leave out, workers or immigrants or people who are actively, seeking better education, within the schools. And so when I was in office, we actually developed a whole new voice of folks to work together with the community, the neighborhood association folks, and broaden what was really important to be in the quality of life for people in the city. We were able to move forward during my time in office on, getting huge park improvements that we're now seeing come into place on McLaren Park is the most beautiful park. This is a picture of McLaren Park behind me. We have new roads and bike paths and walkways and, playgrounds that are all a part of that because of the great, activism and collective voice of people in District 11. We have 2 new 100% affordable housing sites that are being built in District 11. We're still in the pipeline, but we were able to get them in the pipeline based on the new voices that came forward for District 11 residents. We were able to get community gardens and community farms here, after school programs, more bike lanes, just a whole level of infrastructure that really wasn't being focused on by neighborhood association groups. And we were moving that forward, really successful. And, because I was a progressive and the mayor was a moderate, the mayor's office would really turn down the spigot on how quickly they were going to get projects, done. And when I was in the district, so a lot of the things that I was hoping to cut the red ribbons on when I was in office didn't happen until the next person, until Asha Safai came into place. I gave him a list of all our projects, and these are the people that helped to work on them. Basically, he just decided not to work with the folks that we brought to the table, that we brought to have a voice at City Hall, and just work with the neighborhood association folks. And, it was a big loss for a lot of people in the city. And it really meant, or in District 11, it really meant that the people in District 11 who had seen that they could actually, tip the scales on who gets supported and how we can have a district that's served by, everyone in the district can be served by the city, that they lost that ability, wanted to make sure that they could have a challenger to Asha Safai. I was interested in running, but I also wanted to make sure that a lot of the community folks that, wanted to reclaim that voice together were interested in supporting me. And they were going through their process over multiple years to identify a candidate. And out of that process, we were interviewing, eventually, and they decided to come and support my candidacy moving forward. So it was a group decision that was made. And it was a decision that was really made that the power of to be able to make City Hall work is not an insider strategy. It's not like a City Hall representative just saying, I'm going to do everything for you and you're going to owe me for it. It's basically, we need to work together, and you're on the outside. We'll build our power on the outside City Hall, so the person on the inside can be a fulcrum to actually make huge policy changes that can affect the outside at a better level. And it's that power that we have together, inside outside power, join together, that can actually make a difference. And that's what we want to reclaim back in District 11. We want to make sure that we have a vision for the district that's going to look at social housing, affordable housing, 100% affordable housing on all public land projects, and at least 50% affordable housing, family housing on private property developments. That should be the standard across the city. It should be the standard in District 11. The new supervisor has come in. He's actually been involved in real estate development for a number of years. And that's where he probably gets a lot of his income from, is from real estate property. And has a lot of friends who are developers who helped to fund his campaign. If you look at his contributions to his campaign right now, I think he has over $200,000. A good portion of that comes from real estate interests and developers. And basically, he's monopolizing the land that's available for development here for his cronies to be able to develop here in a way that's going to gentrify our neighborhood. If you look forward to the future, if we're to continue in this pathway, we know that a lot of the working class, middle class people here would no longer be able to afford to live here. That the housing that would be built here would not be built for us, but for the 1% and wealthy people, and we would only be an afterthought. Working people who seek affordable housing, whether it's property ownership or renting, we need to be on the front of that, and not an afterthought about how we develop in the city. And it's that changing of how we we develop and who the city works for that we need to enable to happen with new government resources, of which the public bank is going to be one of them.
I love hearing your vision, and I particularly want to just distinguish and independently praise both the substance of it, immigrant rights, public banking, climate justice, worker rights, affordable housing, and the method of it, like the how with you, I feel like is as inspiring as the what. And to hear about the way you were able to take support from community and activist organizations in D11 and project that into an agenda that shifted policy and created projects for the community. It's amazing. It's exactly the kind of leadership we need on the board. And I'm very excited and honored to support your candidacy. Do you want to talk a little bit about anything that people can do to support you? I know we can't do events, right, because there's a pandemic happening, but what are the other ways that folks can show up to get involved in your campaign?
My website is avalos2020.com. And, always I'm running against an incumbent who is involved with the real estate industry and developers. And he's well funded by them, over to the tune of about $200,000 at least. And if people, I'm not receiving any money from developers or real estate interests. When I ran in 2008, I didn't take their money then. I didn't take money from lobbyists. You're barred from taking money from lobbyists now. So, it's really everyday people, grassroots folks who are funding my campaign. And if people are able to make a contribution there, that would be tremendous support. So avalos2020.com. And it'll be our website that you could sign up to actually volunteer for the campaign, to get our updates on the campaign. Right now, under shelter in place, we do not have any activities we're doing, but we'll be starting up some virtual phone banks in the next couple of weeks to reach out to residents and start identifying voters probably around mid-May and get the campaign going in earnest. So people are able to go on our website and sign up as a volunteer, or able to make a financial commitment, however large or small. That will be great. If people are San Francisco residents, which I hope, your contributions up to your first $150 that you contribute will be matched 6-1. So $150 of a contribution will actually bring in $900 of public financing. That will help level the playing field for grassroots candidates like myself, and so that'll be a tremendous way to help. This coming Friday is we're doing a Facebook Live event for May Day, for International Workers' Day. We'll be talking about about the conditions of workers here, especially immigrant workers in District 11, and we'll be hearing from worker leaders in the neighborhood and what their experiences are, and they'll be asking me what I intend to do to support them if I get into office.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and for running, and for the incredible representation you've offered the southern part of the city, and that I hope you'll have a chance to offer again. I will invite everybody who's watching us to join me in supporting John's campaign. Thanks again, John, for joining us. I look forward to seeing more of you and doing whatever I can to help support you over the next several months.
Thank you for having me, and best of luck in your campaign.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay.
So a few more updates from folks. We'll walk through a couple upcoming events that I'm excited about. And then we're going to turn to a special musical guest who I'm especially excited to close the live stream with today. Just coming up in the next couple days, tomorrow morning, I have the chance to, I'm really excited about rejoining Crystal and Sagar on Rising on the Hill. That'll be very early, our time, Pacific Coast, so I don't expect folks to tune in live. I'll be on before 7 a.m. local time, but check us out online. There'll certainly be YouTube links from that, and would love to invite anybody watching today to share that interview with your respective networks. Friday is May Day, incredibly important historic opportunity to assert labor and worker rights. I'll be participating in a car caravan protest at Pier 50 from 10 a.m. to noon. Some of the co-sponsoring groups include the Coalition on the Homeless.
Hey, Emily.
I believe the Tenants Union is also involved. Invite everybody to join us again at Pier 50 at 10 a.m. on Friday morning. And we also have a number of training video conferences coming up for volunteers. Again, we've launched our distributed phone banking program, and we'd love to invite anybody to join us. The times at which they happen are 6 p.m. on Tuesdays, so Tuesday evenings, Thursday afternoons at 2 and Saturday afternoons at 12. If you can sign up for any of those slots, and if you're not available at those times, we can get you a recording to view it at your convenience. But sign up at shahid.fyi/volunteer. I do want to give a quick shout out to the folks on our team and beyond who made today's live stream possible. Before I go to our special guest, in addition to our special guest, John Avalos, who just joined us, been joined behind the scenes today by volunteer John Ellis, our data and website director, Derek Liu, our finance director, Emily Jones, who's very instrumental in helping as well. And I want to turn now to our very special guest. I had the opportunity earlier today, in fact, this just a few hours ago, I connected with Lia Rose. And Leah, I knew as a inspired creator of videos, political videos. She made a particular video for Bernie Sanders that has been viewed by millions of people. And she's also a performance artist and has a song that is so very particularly relevant to Friday and May Day. And so with that, I want to particularly thank for all your creative vision and work, Leah Rose, to the live stream, and invite you to close us out with a song.
Amazing. Thank you. And it's so good to meet you. And I know we have friends that go way back, which is so cool. We were in the streets together at some of the same protests around the Iraq War and everything. Thank you for all you're doing. And like the conversation you were just having about, we need people on the inside and the outside that are working for change. That's exactly it. And thank you for being willing to do this and run. And I'm so supportive of your campaign. This is a song that I've been collaborating with Ryan Harvey, who I know you're friends with as well. We've been
that guy.
He's such a good guy. He basically wrote the song and we've just been collaborating on it together. And it's called We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For. I feel like your campaign is very much in the spirit of the Not Me, Us movement. And I'm going to start a little loop. Thanks again. If not now, then when? When your children grow up, will you pass it to them? Tell them you were scared to stand up back then. If not now, then when? Is it too much to ask for a life free of hate? A place to call home and a dignified wage? Who here will fight for the world we deserve? 'Cause we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. If not us, then who will take the bold steps that we have to? When the difference will be what we do or don't do. If not us, then who? Is it too much to ask for a life free of hate? A place to call home and a dignified wage? Who here will fight for the world we deserve? 'Cause we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. If not now, then when? You're just gonna sit on the side while it happens again. After so many years of talking, my friend. If not now, then when? And who here among us will stand up and fight? Organize bravely and walk out on strike. We know that actions speak louder than words. And we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
Bravo. Bravo. Thank you so much, Leah, for the music and the vision. What an incredible way to finish out the live stream. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everybody online tuning in. Thank you to the production team, all of our supporters around the country. It's been a great hour being with you. I look forward to rejoining you next week, same time, same place. Thanks for all your support.